Everybody, welcome back to EDBEAT. I'm April Cummings with Cayman Live TV, and joining me, of course, Patrick Brendel from Cayman Current. Hey, Patrick.
Hi, April. How are you?
I'm doing very well this morning. As you can see, I have stepped up my makeup game thanks to my daughter, who has taken care of these matters for me, so that we can focus purely not on my style, but on the substance of our content today, which is really important. We have a special guest with us today to talk about one of the interesting announcements that came out of the strategic policy statement, don't we, Patrick?
That's right, April.
Morning to you too. All right. Stacey VanDevelde is with us today. She's from Feed Our Future. If you were listening to the strategic policy statement or any of our last two episodes, you would know that one of the really interesting headlines that came out had to do with the announcement that the PACT government is planning to feed children in our schools. And this is something that Feed Our Future was founded for. Let's bring in Stacey right now. I'm going to go click some magical buttons. Stacey, thanks so much for joining us today on EDBEAT. We really appreciate the time.
Good morning. Thank you for the invite.
So let's get started. Patrick and I are going to kind of switch back and forth on the Q&A here. But let's start with kind of what the reaction was of Feed Our Future's board when they heard this news, and maybe a little bit about what impact you think this might have. The organization was founded really to address this very problem.
That's correct. It was a pleasant surprise because we weren't aware that this was being seriously contemplated, but obviously it was well received by our board. We've been operating for 10 years now, as you say, and the whole objective when we set up was to try to tackle this issue of hunger in our community by way of our partnership with the schools, where so much more opportunity can be afforded to our children. So if we capture them in the school, the safety net, I think the Premier actually used that term. We use it a lot. Schools are a safety net. Capture them there and ensure that they are fueled up, then the sky hopefully is the limit from there. So it was a surprise, but welcomed by us, because having been doing this work for 10 years now, we know the need, we know there's a lot of inequality, as far as access to the schools, and that has a direct impact on the outcomes for our children. So if we want to see, they say education is a great equalizer, if we want to see some change, we have to consider, from our point of view, the part that nutrition and health plays in those educational outcomes. Because we have in some of the schools quite a large population of them that are either not coming to school because of lack, they don't have anything to eat, they may be unwell, their parent hasn't brought them to school. Meals can get the children to school, and once we get them there, then hopefully we can feed them in a healthy way, so that they are well, they continue to come to school, but more importantly, then they can gain from all the opportunities that the school offers, from the educational side, the mentoring, the after school. It's a whole community network, and the school is an important partner to us in that regard. So we feel like we're supporting the schools and vice versa. So I think it's a good decision. Obviously, there's a lot to be, I think, thought about still, how it's actually going to work out. It is a big school population. We want to make sure that, yes, we feed the children, but we're feeding them in a healthy way, because what they are eating is just as important, because it's not just about educational outcomes and academics. That's very key, but it's also about the health of our young children, and it all goes together. So if you have unwell children, they're going to become unwell adults, but if they're unwell, they're not going to be able to cope and function and perform well in school either. They're probably going to miss school more often, because of the issue. And this whole cycle, just will perpetuate, because if you have a low-income family that's, faces instability with food, you may not have a child that presents at school very often because they're hungry, they're sick, whatever. So then they fall behind, then they become adults. They're unable to access, because they don't have the skills, the basic education, they can't access employment, they can't advance, and then let's say they go on to have their own families, and this just continues. So I think this is key to, it's a small factor, it sounds simple, it's just a school meal, but actually plays a key part. So I know that was a really long answer. It was a lot I could say. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think you said a lot of interesting things. We wish we could have you on for the whole hour, but I know that you have other commitments. And one of the things that struck me about this whole situation is there's a lot of nonprofit organizations in Cayman, including Feed Our Future. I think of organizations like the Humane Society or groups that organize beach cleanups that are kind of existing in areas that arguably could be considered a function of the government. So they grow up in these cracks in government services in, say, animal control and nutrition and public health, and even making sure that public spaces are clean. So it's interesting to me that in this instance, the government is proactive, or not proactively, but they are stepping forward and filling that space. And one of the things, as you alluded to, that the premier said about the safety net at school meals is he said COVID during the pandemic, it really exposed the true situation of hunger in Cayman. Do you think that's accurate? Do you think people, by and large, had a good assessment of what the situation was? And I know that you guys were really active in shifting your programs and responding during the pandemic. Can you talk about that as well?
Yeah. Whether or not that's accurate, I'm not entirely sure. Like, hunger is one of these things that if you don't see it, it doesn't exist. And certainly the work we do is not new, and where government has provided relief for many years as well when it comes to food and school meals. This is not new. So it has been around, perhaps not on such a large scale, and there are differing reasons over time that happens. I mean, the root causes are usually poverty, unemployment. Certainly COVID exacerbated it. So that's one of those ebbs and flows where, oh boy, yeah, because it really brought to the people in the ministry, in the educational departments, in government, not so much the schools, because the people in the schools are on the grounds and they were fully aware, because we work with them all the time. They're putting out these fires all the time. But I think it brought to everyone else's attention, like, wow, this was a bigger issue than we actually had a grasp on. So that was a good thing, I think. And it also was an opportunity, because over COVID, we had a chance to work together far more closely, about what we do. We had a real partnership in that we relied even more on our partners in the school to help us bus the meals out to the children. So, we were still doing our part, but we had much more collaboration. And like I said, it brought about that awareness about, wow, this is big. So we really may need to, when this is all settled, step back and think about how can we tackle this better. And that's maybe partly why this has come about. Because as I said, are we tackling it the right way by having Feed Our Future do what we do? NAU assists where we can. We have Kiwanis that does it. Is that the right way? As I said, we've been doing this a long time. I feel like this equalizes things. It ensures not just low-income families a healthy meal, or a healthy meal if we work at some of the attributes of the meal, but we will be ensuring every child that goes to a public school a chance to access a healthy meal, which means, more whole grains, more fruit, more protein, more of the things that will actually make every one of them more energized, healthy adults, and hopefully citizens. So I think that the opportunity came out of that, to really look at what we're doing, and if the resources are being used in the right way. Because from our experience as well, like, a lot of especially when schools reopen, there's so much energy and anxiety and work towards addressing this problem, which I feel is just a real disservice to the children and a waste, because we have amazing counselors, for example, in the school that could do other things that these kids need apart from the meal. So let's get them into the school. They know they're going to get a breakfast offering or lunch off, settle them down, and let the real the real work begin. Let those people do what they're meant to do, which is teach and mentor and help. You know, because there's a lot more than an empty tummy that just walked through the gate of the school.
So I'm just going to straight up confess that I do not know any specifics of how this plan
Secrets.
is going to work at this stage, right?
Mhm.
So, and there may be specifics. I just haven't heard them yet and don't know what they are, if they exist. So that could purely be me not having found that yet. But that said, there are a lot of logistics to consider. And I'm going to, Patrick, what I like to say, I'm going to have an opinion now. My opinion is, I think having come from a family that wasn't really wealthy, but wasn't, you know, starving either, there is it's sort of a strange feeling of embarrassment if you're the kid that needs the extra lunch or the thing. So I do like the philosophy of just saying everybody's going to get it. If you need it or want it, it's up to you.
Yeah.
It doesn't fix everything, but it's a nice way to present to that. But logistically speaking, this is a lot to manage, and you guys have been doing this for quite some time. There are probably challenges and opportunities that you might be able to assist government with in kind of working through this. Is that something you're open to, and are there any things you'd say, hey, you need to pay attention to these things?
Definitely. I mean, we, from the very beginning, we've always tried to complement not just feeding the children with some of our workshops, which are always focused on, you know, cooking health and budgets, shopping smart. How do I spread what's in my fridge or pantry this week? And so we've always offered that up in the schools as a service, and we get our families in and the children in and expose them to all that. So that's just one piece of it. But, you know, the government themselves years ago worked with, I think it was a Children's Health Task Force, maybe the Heart Fund, to talk about obesity levels in the schools, and they developed these nutritional standards that were meant to be followed. And it's not an easy document to follow by any means. It's cumbersome, but there is a lot of value, and it had some very good directives on what the canteen should be doing. Now, I don't believe anyone has ever really policed that. In the early days, yes, but nowadays, no. And so there's a lot that could be done that we could probably support by way of just looking, as I said a few minutes ago, we can ensure that everybody gets access to a healthy meal, which has so many positive knock-ons, not just those that we view as low, you know, high risk or underprivileged. But the school could be known, you know, the school could look overall, all the schools, at how they improve just their view on health generally, starting with, you know, what they're offering to the kids as a part of that, and limiting the things that they know will develop into harmful diseases. Let's say diabetes is very prevalent in the Caribbean, you know, which will have greater costs. So even behavior, children will behave better. It's a fact, you know, they will behave better.
Adults too, if you think about it. Sometimes they have to throw a piece of bread at me to calm me down.
Yeah.
It's one of those things.
I mean, the whole thing about being hangry is real, you know.
It is no joke. Ask my family.
Yeah. So, but yeah, there's a lot to be considered because, yes, because the other thing is, I think dialogue has to happen with, are they going to keep the current meat providers in the canteens? Are they going to change that? Are they going to go for economies of scale? Are they going to do breakfast and lunch? Or are they, you know, there's a lot that could, this is an opportunity again, like I keep saying that, but every time we come to these crossroads, we should say, what's the opportunity here? And there's an opportunity to really make an example, and a proud one, of what schools can do to complement the health of our children, because the academic, social, behavioral, you know, the health, all the gains are there. And it would be just a great direction to say, look at our schools. They're leading an example in investing in the health of our children, which actually then invests in their education and so much more.
Yeah, I think in Cayman, sometimes it can be frustrating when maybe we don't have certain programs that other countries do. Like, so say the landfill, even, you know, why don't we have a decent solid waste management facility? But I like to think of it, when we finally do get around to doing it, we really have so many good models to follow that can be cost effective and just plain effective. So, for me, I see, the key word is opportunity. Here's an opportunity for the government to look at the best, the best kind of child nutrition programs that exist and really roll out something that, the country can really be proud of.
Right. Agreed. Yeah, agreed. And also too, maybe it needs to be taken off in smaller bites. Maybe part of the rollout is a pilot. So we're going to start with this school, make sure we iron out some kinks, see how it works, see the take up, because you also don't want wastage. If you're radically changing some things about what you provide for the meals, there may be some resistance initially.
Broccoli is good, Stacey. Broccoli is good. It can.
So, yeah.
But there was a transition period to retrain my taste buds, for example.
Yeah.
Or,
Yeah.
Did you guys ever see? Did you see the Jamie Oliver show where the British chef went to America to teach the kids school meals? Yeah. And I think it was West Virginia, which I actually love West Virginia. It's a beautiful place. But
my dad's people are from. Just saying.
Yeah, they had the government there had decided that French fries were a vegetable. So to meet with the state code, they were just slopping French fries with everything, and he was just appalled and aghast.
Right. Nothing against French fries, but not every day.
But that's the other thing too. Sometimes I think we underplay the role of nutrition in general for mental health as well as everything else. There is also a desire, sometimes we want a quick fix, right? A quick win. We're going to feed all the kids in all the schools next Tuesday. And you consistently raise the point of nutrition, healthy nutrition, wholesome meals, healthful meals for that matter. Because in truth, just because I've got a full stomach does not mean that I'm actually eating in a healthy way. And frankly, catching me while I'm young is a better way to teach me the lifelong habits around that as well. So it's not just good for today and learning today academically, but it's also great life skills. I mean, as some of us continue to battle through our adult lives, the fact that we didn't really take on some of those lessons early on. So it's a multifaceted, it's like a tiny little magic bullet is what feeding our kids is. It's like a little tiny one.
Yeah.
So we have, as you've said, an opportunity to roll this out carefully and well, learn from other places. We also have an opportunity to learn from the expertise of the organizations who've been doing this in a nonprofit fashion for the past few years. What are you thinking about what's next?
I mean, well, we are keen like you to see the details because, for us, it helps us as a board and as a very active NPO to think about where we are now and what our next steps are. We're very much about sustainability and, adapting our program to the needs of the schools and the community. And we've already, when we set up to feed our future, it was very literal with food as a beginning, but we always had the idea that we would advance this to be more than just literally feeding them food. And so in more recent years, we have added a number of educational enrichment programs that do that, because as I touched on earlier, really the goal here is to break cycles. We want our children to be able to take advantage of the gains of the country, to get opportunities for employment, advancement, and to have productive, empowered lives. So we are already doing things along those lines, and we could probably do so much more. So yes, we can still have an arm that supports feeding, and it may change from being in the schools. Maybe there's something else. Since the COVID, as you mentioned, we've had a lot more requests for support for food outside of just the school meals from some of our families, as you would expect, because there's still, there's hard times, but we could focus on some other things that may have more life-changing, longer impacts, right? And then, wow, that's great. So I think we are open to a partnership with the government to make sure that we continue to fulfill our mission, but doing it in a way that we know is having the objective of, really uplifting children and families in our community. So
Stacey, thanks so much for joining us this morning. I
Thank
know
you.
you're busy. We really
Okay,
appreciate the
helpful.
time.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much. And then I just want to give people a quick bit of information. So if you want to check out more about Feed Our Future, you can get the whole history background at feedourfuturecayman.org. And of course, follow them on social media for all the active stuff that's going on right now. Thanks again. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. Have a lovely day.
You too.
Bye.
So Patrick, I'm working on my fancy button skills
Pretty
here.
good.
Anything you want to add before we switch gears here?
Just one thought is it's kind of this how she said hunger is this problem that isn't really visible, and you look around and you don't see a bunch of skinny kids or skinny adults like you see on the infomercials from the famines.
Oh, they kill me.
Yeah, but the really like obesity and being overweight is a really big indicator of poor nutrition. So you may be getting the calories, but it's not the right kind of calories and not the right kind of activity. So it's just one of those things when you look at the Caribbean and being a place where a lot of people, the problem with obesity.
Patrick, I've lost you for a second here. I'm just going to turn you off and turn you back on. Okay, so Patrick is talking about just sort of the hidden impacts of, So anyway, Patrick's just talking a little bit about the hidden impacts of nutrition. So if you have poor nutrition and you're not seeing what looks like those ads we saw in the old days with the starving children in Africa, we assume that there's not a problem. But in truth, there well may be a problem. And Patrick touched on the fact that, hi, Patrick, I was just recapping what you said when your signal went out, that sometimes when you see people who are overweight or kids who are overweight, you may not realize that the problem of poor nutrition is just as likely sometimes to lead to obesity and diabetes and other issues as it is it doesn't fit that stereotypical image that we have, again, from the ads that we saw back in the old days. So, yeah, sorry, I was talking for Patrick because the internet was mean to him and took him away for a moment, but he's back.
Yeah, we could lip sync it if you want. Yeah.
Fair enough. This is real life. The internet happens this way. So, Patrick, I know we spent a fair bit of time on our last episode talking about some of the things that came up in the strategic policy statement. One of those areas was really you vowed and have come through to do a detailed look at the difference between the current government, which is the PACT government, and the previous government, which is the progressives, kind of looking at their promises, and also looking at the difference between an SBS, which happens now when you're elected and in power, versus your manifesto, which happens while you're running for office. So I know we only have, I don't know, maybe 15, 20 minutes here, give or take. I put a clock on Patrick today.
This is Cayman time.
It's Cayman time.
Order lunch. We're going to be here for a while.
That's why I cheat. Well, the other thing I want to point out, Patrick, is that Cayman Current, you have published a very detailed examination of these issues. So if there's something we miss or don't get through today, that's okay. You go to caymancurrent.org, you're going to get the whole spiel. All right, so let's start, Patrick. I'm thinking perhaps, I'm just checking my notes here. I think perhaps maybe we start with the difference between a manifesto and an SPS.
Yes, I said let's get the caveats up front because we're not, to continue food analogies, it's not exactly apples to apples.
No.
Maybe it's something tangerines to oranges. But it's the best we have. So I think the strategic policy statement really is a document that's put out by a government that lays out their policies and plans for the next 3 years. As opposed to, so that's what we're working with the PACT government. On the other side, I'm working with the Progressives Manifesto, which is a less mature document than an SPS, and that's really the list of campaign promises and vows. And if you elect us, this is what we really, really want to do over the next 4 years. So if you think of it in terms of stages of maturity, you'll have a political manifesto, which then they'll get with the civil servants who will say, well, actually, some of this stuff is impossible. And they go, okay, well, let's hone it and refine it to the strategic policy statement, talking to other members of your government. And then where the rubber starts to meet the road is in the next few months when the budget statements come out. So the budget plans start coming out. And so that's when you're actually putting money and dollar figures to specific line items. And, and then they get to work, and then we'll see how it actually comes out. Probably the next year when they start examining how they actually spent the money and what happened.
So the one of the interesting points that you've just mentioned, and because I also am at Radio Cayman and I'm a civil servant, it is an interesting experience to be on that side of the equation for once, because normally I would have seen it purely externally. And so it's very similar to the sort of give and take you might see in a corporate environment, by the way. You've got your different departments and divisions who have certain objectives they're trying to meet, and they would like the funding to support those objectives. Sometimes it's human capital, sometimes it's technology, sometimes other types of infrastructure. And so you really have to take the big ideas that the ministers, because that's sort of where your strategic, I guess your vision for that matter, is coming from. And you need to make sure that all these things are coming together as an entity within government. And that can be a challenge because you may not have all the money, the tools, the resources to do those things. But also these same ministers were once on the campaign trail and promised things to the people who elected them into office. So there is a bit of, it's I don't want to say reality check, but there's a bit of give, which I do say sometimes, but a bit of give and take on your goal is to achieve this. You're thinking that that's the way to do it. We already, though, perhaps have done this work that you're not aware of in this way. Here's how we can achieve what you're after, but here's what we need to do it, and here's kind of what our capacity is already. So it is a bit more sophisticated than just give me some money and I will go do some things. There is quite a bit of work behind the scenes that I've seen.
Yeah, and I think the
You
old
look
saying.
shocked by that. No, Patrick, civil
Certainly.
work.
Yeah, and I think the old saying is, politics is the art of compromise.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that word can carry a negative connotation sometimes, but in this case, like it's reality. And as you said, there's this the political parliamentary component coming up against the civil service in terms of their different not even visions, but their different perspectives and information that they have. But what's interesting to me about the PACT government is there's been a lot, not a lot, but I assume there's been lots of discussion and compromise as the individual candidates who campaigned on their own platforms and their own districts get with each other, and somebody says, well, I kind of thought this was a good idea for education, Mrs. O'Connor Connolly, and she says, well, and then Wayne says, well, I talks to Chris Saunders and says this is what I thought we should do, and then so there's this internal discussion and debate that for sure happens within a party as well, but they didn't. But the PACT, of course, because it's a coalition of independents, they didn't get together during the campaign and put out their own unified campaign platform. So, as I've been maybe wrongly saying, but as I like to say this, I look at the strategic policy statement as having a manifesto-like component to it, as well as being a policy document.
Yeah, we did see a story about, I'm going to call it workshopping, but I don't really know if that's what it is. But sort of where the members of this new government basically got together and did the work of trying to align, figure out what their priorities are, align their vision, et cetera. And I think that is something that particularly if you're not a party, needs to happen. The other, another component, and I've pulled up your website on the screen really quickly. There were a couple things that you've taken a look at here. So you've outlined, I think, the overlap areas between the PACT government and the progressives. And we can go through some of that, but Patrick, wanted you to scroll down and tell people about your chart that you've got here at the bottom. So you've created an interactive chart for people who are really interested in drilling down. I am a nerd, but I thought it was pretty cool to be able to sort through that, what the PACT SPS says, what the Progressives Manifesto says, and then the different categories. Can you just share a little bit about this and how it works?
Sure. So as you said, so what I've done is I've kind of based this table off the SPS because the PACT is the government; they're setting the tone, so it's only fair that they get the organizational prerogative. So I went through the 29 different education policies and proposals laid out in the strategic policy statement, and I put them all in a column. I categorized them according to how the government categorized them in the SPS.
Right.
So then I went through the Progressives Manifesto, which thankfully I had gone back through in March, so it wasn't all new research. And I kind of tried to map them. So when somebody said, we're going to finish the new John Gray High School, I said, oh, the manifesto says we're going to finish the new John Gray High School. And so I tried to align them as close as possible so you could see where they happen to have identical policies. Mm-hmm. And then in some areas, they're very different, or one doesn't speak to that point or another. And so then I just did my best to say, well, what do you guys think about John Gray? As you did, you type in John Gray. Well, the PACT is for it. The Progressives is for it. And the point isn't really to say almost, it's fun to play a game of what if the Progressives are in charge, what would they have done with education? Yeah. But to me, I'm thinking forward looking is when we're talking about the budget and we're approving things and debating different policies, is this opposition, which is going to be a strong, unified opposition, because they're all in the same party, or else at least with Joint Seymour, like they campaign together as a coalition. Yeah. So there'll be a unified opposition, and if they're in support of something and have been publicly in support of it, of course they're going to be far more likely to support it in the LA the Cayman Islands Parliament than if they wanted something different or opposed to it. They can throw some monkey wrenches in the gears, right?
Yeah, and even when they're in support of something, this does give them an opportunity to ask some tough questions about the execution or the direction in which it's going. So if I say, yes, I support free school lunches, however, we're going to watch to make sure that you do what you say, it shows kind of that you're doing your job as an opposition, as opposed to just yelling and screaming about it. Your chart will help us in this journey too, by the way. So, and again, as you pointed out, and I just want to reiterate this, a strategic policy statement and a manifesto are not the same thing. However, in some respects, for us as citizens of the country and voters, most of us, it gives us a chance to see how this group of independents is seeing things collectively and compare it to how the Progressives as a party and alliance saw some of the issues. So it may not be apples to apples, but it's about as close as we're going to get with the current set of circumstances, I think.
Yeah, and I think with the SPS, in terms of looking at it as a visionary or political document, and because education is my focus, I thought it was very, very key that the PAC chose, out of their 9 broad outcomes, they put education as number 1. So, if you're looking at reading between the lines or signaling, and you combine that with the 50% increase in education spending, whether or not you agree or disagree or want to see the details of specific policies, it's inarguable that they are placing a big emphasis on education.
Yeah, for sure. No question there. All right, so hang on, I'm just going to move your website out of the picture for a second, so it's back to you and I. You also took a look at things so one thing, you looked at things that are the same, you looked at things that are different, and the article that accompanies trying to remember if your article did it or your email did it. But anyway, you looked at some of the things that are similar and different. And we did talk a little bit about this before, but it's the things that aren't in either that I thought stood out. So you not only said, here's what they're doing, or here's what they seem to be in the same direction on. Here's what's not in one but is in the other. But what's in neither approach stood out for me. Talk a little bit about that for me.
Sure. I think the bottom line for me is when you look at what the progressives' plan was and when you look at what the PACT's plan is, the unifying bridging factor is Minister O'Connor Connolly. Mm-hmm. And so when my question was, how far away from the path laid out by the progressives will the PACT go? Well, by and large, to me, it looks like they're on the same path and headed in the same direction fundamentally, although the PACT has thrown in a lot more, I'd say, support programs, such as the free school lunches, free university education. All these things are big, major proposals, but they are broadly in line with the direction that the country had been going in. So the things that you don't see are, for example, what you do see is we're going to create a school governing body. So maybe we'll have a big school board or maybe individual school boards for the public schools. But what you don't see is more radical fundamental proposals like we're going to do charter schools, like former Minister Tara Rivers had floated out these UK Academy style schools. She floated about 8 years ago. So that's not on the table, at least in these documents. You don't see voucher programs. So saying if somebody would rather go to a private school, we're going to give Caymanians, $5,000 or $10,000 to go to the school of their choice. You don't see. What else wouldn't you see? Vouchers again for early years preschool. You do see kind of a broad effort to integrate Caymanians and non-Caymanians in the schools. That's what the PACT has kind of said is kind of a broad goal. But what you don't see is we're opening up the public schools to non-Caymanians right away.
And I'm going to interject and say, just because you do not see some of these things, that doesn't, how do I say this? I don't know that you can always say that you must have a radical change in order to make appropriate change. This is from the girl who never met a crash diet she didn't love, right? Radical change. I'm going to eat 200 calories in grapes every day for 3 months. And yes, I will lose all 5,000 pounds, but it's not sustainable or manageable because I did not do it in that slow, methodical, incremental way where I, did some stuff, evaluated, did some. Everything's food today for me, Patrick. But my point being that while sometimes it looks like a great idea to try something totally different, you can argue that that's not always the best approach, that you perhaps are looking at what you think the bigger issues are from your perspective to deal with first, and then along the way continue to do some work evaluating. I don't know that that's what's happening, but I am saying just because it isn't something that's at the top of the agenda or under, high level consideration currently, does not mean that that's bad or good. It just means it's not there right now, or that we're not aware of any work examining these as solutions or things that will enhance the system. Is that fair?
Yeah. Yes. And I think it's fair to say that, it doesn't look like they're blowing it up and starting all over again.
Fair
so
enough.
if you're thinking of the school system as, a human body or whatever, like they've taken a look at the bones and they've decided the bones are sound and they're looking to pack more muscle on the bones rather than scrapping the whole thing and building something new
and potentially killing it in the process. Just saying.
Yeah.
Just saying. So in any case, in Cayman Current, you can see Patrick's full spiel on the deal, and also that chart, which I quite enjoyed because I thought it was really an interesting way to look at how, what things were the same, what things were different, and 2 years from now, when it comes to, and I'm thinking 2 years is a reasonable time frame to see at least some changes, at least for the things that came out the gate, is these are the things we want to do that are going to make big change. It'll be, I'm interested to see how this SPS and the budget stack up, but then also in terms of outcomes, how that will look coming forward, because monitoring the quality of what you do, or the outputs that you've promised, is sometimes easier said than done. It is not always easy to assess on an ongoing basis when you're constantly putting out fires. And I'm not making an excuse for anybody. I'm just saying this is a fact. It is challenging to continually do that unless it is really part of your DNA already.
Absolutely, April. 100% correct.
April, you're so smart. So good. Is there anything else that you want to make sure we talk about today? I know we've been on the line for 40 minutes, and we always have more stuff to talk about, to be frank. But I wanted to make sure that we covered all of our bases today about the things we said we would talk about. That doesn't mean we can't talk about other stuff. My other confession of the day is that I was, Finance Committee has been on, and so I've been monitoring it, from 3,000 steps away. And so I do want to go back and take a closer look at some of the exchanges that happen there, because when it comes to, so the prior, the prior government's in the room and the new government's in the room, and then you have people who are now asking questions of the people who used to do the job that they did before, but a lot of the decisions came under their watch. But when it comes to education, I think there were some bits and pieces there that I'm going to at least go back and see what I can find. So that may prove interesting for a future day, but I haven't had a chance to go through. I'm still pouring through the Cayman Airways section and the travel, essential travel discussions and all that kind of stuff.
That's a good idea. I should probably do that too.
Well, you are the detail-oriented dude of the two of us. Let's be clear. But yeah, there's bound to be some interesting stuff in there as well. And then the next step beyond that will be, I think, seeing again when the budget stuff starts to roll around, what changes, what hasn't. One thing that I'm missing that is probably in the whole equation somewhere, though, is how we understand that we have the Department of Education standards looking at the schools and the schools' performances, and that's an important function. But I also am curious as to, besides that, how are we looking at our progress in terms from government internally, really, from the Department of Education Services and the ministry? How are they seeing success, and how they're going to get there? So that might be an interesting topic for a future day as well. It's always good to know how people are evaluating things as well, and why. Because what I may think is appropriate is doesn't always necessarily fit. It's like the arguments I used to have with accountants about, I don't know, barters on television airtime and stuff like that. They couldn't understand the concept, and I really struggled to explain it to them because we spoke two different languages. So understanding, what we're trying to achieve and making sure that we know why we're doing it and why we're making the choices we make can go a long way in terms of keeping the public informed and engaged, and frankly, helping make a better education system for the country.
Yeah, agreed. I think if it's always helpful if somebody says these are all the things we're going to do. These are the problems that we think they're going to address, and this is how we're going to measure. These are our goals to measure that what we did, actually we did it, and or we actually did it, but it did what we wanted it to. Mm-hmm. So if you can say, we want to get to 70% level 2 pass rate in the public schools, or we want to make sure that the 4 or 6 year graduation rate from college is X, or this is our target unemployment rate for 20-year-olds, for example, then you can go back and, time's up, let's check and see how you did. And hopefully you met or exceeded those targets. But even if you don't, then you say, why didn't this work out the way we thought it did?
Yeah. And was this the right goal as well? At times you do realize that you've had a preconceived notion about what you thought was important, and either the world changes or you found it, that wasn't the right thing under the circumstances. And I think that's something that we struggle with as well, because nobody wants to be caught out. But at the same time, in real life, you are going to sometimes be wrong about what you've looked at as a solution to the problem. And the smart thing would be to adapt and change direction. But we do tend to struggle with that as human beings. But when it comes to education and our kids, it seems to me this is the one area where we kind of need to not have the egos get in the way on that one. Not that anyone does, just philosophically speaking.
Yeah, I think, what do they say on the internet now? They goes, step 1, invest in education. Step 2, ... Step 3, profit. And step 2 is where all the work goes in.
That is the big unknown. All right, Patrick, thanks so much for this week. And of course, we'll be back next week to talk more education stuff. I don't know what Patrick's got on the magic agenda yet, but I know it's going to be something fabulous, exciting, and fun to talk about as well, hopefully.
Oh, absolutely, April. I'll get to work on that right now.
Immediatamente. All right. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in. And of course, we'll be back next week with EDBEAT. Now I got to turn the
Yeah, whenever the logo comes on, I think EDBEAT, party time, excellent.
we're just going to